You need to leave. We don't give loans to people like you." The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding, as Marcus stood frozen at the counter. His pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay composed. Around him, whispers filled the room, some curious, others indifferent. In that moment, rejection wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Yet beneath the sting of humiliation burned something fiercer. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. "I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson," the bank manager said, her voice as cold as frost on a winter morning. She slid the rejection letter across the counter with deliberate indifference. "Your application doesn't meet our standards." Marcus stared at her, his throat tightening. He could feel every pair of eyes in the room boring into him. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling but controlled. "You've had my documents for weeks. I have perfect credit. What standards am I failing?" The manager avoided his gaze, fidgeting with a pen before muttering something vague about policy. Her dismissive tone cut deeper than any insult. Marcus clenched his fists under the table, his mind racing. How could this be happening? Behind him, a white couple chatted casually. Their laughter grated against his ears like nails on glass. Before Marcus could press further, the manager turned abruptly to the couple behind him. They handed over their paperwork, clearly incomplete, and yet within moments they were approved. "Congratulations," the manager said, her tone now warm and inviting. "We'll process your loan immediately." Marcus's stomach churned. His pulse quickened as the disparity hit him like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the system that had always stacked the odds against people like him. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay composed, but inside anger simmered, a slow burn threatening to ignite. As the couple walked away, Marcus exhaled sharply, his hands trembling. He gripped the edge of the counter, grounding himself. The humiliation stung, but beneath it lay something stronger. Resolve. Memories flashed through his mind. Long nights studying by candlelight when the power was shut off, his mother working double shifts to keep food on the table, and countless rejections that had only fueled his determination. This moment wasn't an ending. It was another hurdle, one he refused to let define him. Taking a deep breath, Marcus straightened his posture. His jaw tightened as he silently vowed to fight back. Not just for himself, but for everyone who'd been treated as less than human because of the color of their skin. For now, he walked out of the bank, his steps heavy but purposeful. The battle ahead loomed large, but Marcus knew one thing for certain: giving up wasn't an option. Marcus remembered it like it was yesterday. The sound of his mother's worn-out shoes scuffing against the cracked linoleum floor as she stumbled through the door. She'd just finished another double shift, her face etched with exhaustion but her eyes still burning with determination. "Mama, why do you work so hard?" young Marcus had asked once, his voice trembling with a mix of curiosity and guilt. "Because I want better for you," she replied, her tone firm yet tender. "This world might try to hold us down, but we're not staying there." Her words became his mantra, fueling his resolve to rise above the neglect that plagued their neighborhood. Even then, as a child, Marcus understood the weight of systemic inequities. The flickering streetlights, the underfunded schools, the constant struggle to survive. But he also saw something else: resilience. That same fire now burned within him, driving his dream of creating a safe space for kids who faced the same battles he once did. Years later, Marcus stood outside the bank, replaying the rejection in his mind. Scholarships had been his ticket out of poverty, his chance to rewrite the script society had written for him. Yet here he was, facing yet another barrier, this time disguised as financial policy. He thought about the countless hours he'd spent mentoring local youth, teaching them how to navigate a world that often dismissed their potential. He'd poured every ounce of energy into building a future where they wouldn't have to fight as hard as he did. But no matter how many scholarships he earned or how much progress he made, Institutions always found ways to shut doors in his face. It wasn't personal. It never was. That was what made it worse. These weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a system designed to keep people like him at arm's length. Still, Marcus refused to let bitterness consume him. There had to be another way. As Marcus stepped onto the sidewalk, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. The air felt heavy, pressing down on him like an invisible weight. For a moment, despair threatened to take hold, but then he remembered his mother's voice, steady and unwavering even in her hardest moments. "We're not staying there." Taking a deep breath, Marcus straightened his posture. His jaw tightened, his steps growing more deliberate. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Somewhere deep inside, a spark ignited. Maybe this setback wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of something bigger, something he couldn't yet see. Whatever came next, Marcus knew one thing for certain. He would face it head on. And with that quiet vow, he walked forward, ready to confront whatever fate had waiting for him. "You're saying my income sources aren't verifiable?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. The bank manager leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the desk. "Well, Mr. Johnson, we just need to be thorough," she said, her tone laced with condescension. Before he could respond, she cut him off again. "And this business plan, how realistic is it really? Community centers don't exactly bring in high returns." Her smirk was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus clenched his jaw, biting back a retort. He'd prepared meticulously for this meeting, yet here he was being questioned as if his credentials were suspect. Every interruption felt like another brick added to the wall between him and his dream. He glanced around the room, noticing how casually she had approved others earlier that day. The disparity gnawed at him, fueling a simmering anger he struggled to contain. "This doesn't add up," Marcus said firmly, leaning forward. "I've seen you approve applications with less documentation than mine. Why am I being treated differently?" The manager offered a tight-lipped smile, her eyes avoiding his. "Mr. Johnson, every case is unique. You shouldn't compare yourself to others." Her dismissive tone hit like a slap. Unique? Was that code for something deeper? Marcus pressed on, his voice rising slightly. "It's not about comparison, it's about fairness. My credit score is flawless, my plans are solid, so why does it feel like no matter what I do, I'm still not enough?" She chuckled softly, waving a hand as if brushing off his concerns. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Policy is policy." Her refusal to engage only deepened his resolve. This wasn't personal, it was systemic. And Marcus knew silence wouldn't fix it. Outside the bank, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed Jamal. "You won't believe what just happened," he said, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. Jamal listened intently before responding. "Man, this isn't new. They've been doing this to us forever. But you can't let them win. Fight back." "I don't know, Jamal," Marcus replied, his tone heavy with hesitation. "Taking on an institution like this, it's risky. What if I lose everything?" Jamal's voice grew firm. "What if you don't? Imagine the message it sends. Not just for you, but for everyone watching. Sometimes, one person has to stand so the rest can rise." Marcus exhaled sharply, staring at the ground. The weight of Jamal's words settled over him. For now, uncertainty lingered, but a quiet determination began to take root. Whatever came next, Marcus knew he couldn't stay silent forever. "This ends now," Marcus said, his voice firm as he placed a folder on the counter. Inside were emails detailing dismissive responses, recordings of biased remarks, and testimonies from other black customers who'd faced similar treatment. The bank manager glanced at the documents briefly before pushing them aside. "I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, but this isn't appropriate." Her tone was clipped, dismissive. "It's not appropriate to deny people based on their race," Marcus shot back, his frustration bubbling over. "You've questioned my credibility, mocked my plans, and ignored clear evidence of bias. Why won't you address this?" Her lips curled into a smug smile. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have no choice but to call security." Marcus felt his chest tighten. She wasn't just refusing to listen, she was silencing him. As she reached for the phone, he realized this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who'd been treated as less than human because of the color of their skin. Two burly security guards approached, their expressions unreadable. One grabbed Marcus by the arm, pulling him toward the exit despite his protests. "This isn't just about me," Marcus shouted, his voice echoing through the bank. "It's about every person of color who's been denied justice because of systemic racism." Onlookers froze, some whispering among themselves, others watching in stunned silence. The manager stood nearby, her smirk betraying a cruel satisfaction. Someone pulled out a phone, capturing the moment as Marcus continued to speak. "They think they can silence us, but they can't. We deserve equality. We deserve fairness." The humiliation burned deep, but Marcus refused to let it break him. His words hung in the air long after he was pushed out the door, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed the scene. By morning, the video had spread like wildfire. Social media erupted with hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "End Systemic Racism." Comment sections overflowed with outrage and support, amplifying his message far beyond what he'd imagined. But inside his small apartment, Marcus sat alone, staring at his phone. The glowing screen displayed messages of solidarity, yet all he could feel was emptiness. Had it been worth it? He'd risked everything, his dignity, his reputation, and for what? A fleeting moment of attention? His mind raced with doubts. Would anything really change? Or would the world move on tomorrow, forgetting the pain behind the headlines? For now, the weight of uncertainty pressed down on him, heavier than ever. As Marcus scrolled through the endless stream of comments, one message caught his eye. "Your courage inspired me to speak up too." He paused, rereading the words. Then another. "Because of you, we're having conversations that matter." Slowly, a spark of hope ignited within him. Maybe his stand hadn't been in vain. Maybe the voices rising alongside his could create real change, a shift toward accountability and equity. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, Marcus knew one thing for sure. Together, they were stronger than any system designed to divide them. And with that thought, he set the phone down, ready to face whatever came next. "Marcus, I've got something that might change everything." Sarah's voice crackled through the phone, urgent yet steady. He gripped the receiver tighter, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" "There's a reason they've been so dismissive," she continued. "That branch? It's drowning in debt. Word is, they're desperate to sell." Marcus froze, the weight of her words sinking in. For weeks he'd felt powerless against their bias, but now an opportunity emerged from their very vulnerability. "I'll fund your project," Sarah added firmly. "But more importantly, we can take them down on their own terms." For the first time in days, Marcus felt a flicker of hope, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd been wronged by systems like this one. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, pen scribbling furiously across paper as ideas poured out faster than he could write them down. With Sarah's backing, he wasn't just fighting back, he was rewriting the rules entirely. Acquiring the bank wouldn't just be personal vindication. It would dismantle the machinery of exclusion that had crushed so many dreams. He envisioned turning its oppressive halls into a hub for financial empowerment, a space where marginalized voices weren't silenced but celebrated. Every detail mattered. Every move needed precision. As he mapped out strategies late into the night, Marcus realized how far he'd come. From being dismissed as insignificant to positioning himself as unstoppable. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. And with each step forward, the walls of systemic racism began to crack under the pressure of his resolve. But there was still work to do, and the clock was ticking. News of Marcus's acquisition offer spread quickly, and panic rippled through the bank's upper ranks. The manager paced her office, clutching her phone like a lifeline. "They can't do this," she snapped during a hushed call with headquarters. "If word gets out..." Her voice trailed off, fear choking her words. She tried damage control, reaching out to influential contacts, spinning half-truths. But the tide had already turned. Public scrutiny loomed large, exposing not only her actions, but the institution's long history of discriminatory practices. For the first time, she felt powerless. The same arrogance that once shielded her now left her exposed, vulnerable to the consequences of her choices. Meanwhile, Marcus remained focused, knowing the battle was far from over, but sensing victory within reach. "This is more than just a building," Marcus declared, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "It's proof that resilience can overcome even the deepest roots of injustice." The crowd erupted in cheers, their applause echoing like thunder. Behind him, banners read, "Empowerment through equity," and "Justice starts here." The space, once synonymous with exclusion, now radiated hope, a hub for marginalized entrepreneurs to access financial literacy programs and support. Marcus paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over everyone present. He thought back to the days when he'd been denied, humiliated, dismissed. Those memories fueled every decision leading up to this day. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation. And as Marcus looked out at the sea of faces, he knew the real work was only beginning. Meanwhile, miles away, the former bank manager sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, scrolling through headlines that condemned her actions. "Former bank manager exposed for systemic bias," blared one article. Another called her resignation long overdue. Her hands trembled as she closed her laptop, shame washing over her. Once untouchable, she now faced public scorn, a stark contrast to Marcus's rise. Every interview, every social media post about him served as a reminder of what she had lost: credibility, authority, respect. For Marcus, her downfall wasn't personal, it was symbolic. It showed the world that accountability mattered, even when it came too late. Yet, there was no time to dwell on her fate. His focus remained firmly on the future. News outlets couldn't get enough of Marcus's story. Headlines like "How One Man Turned Rejection into Revolution" dominated feeds, sparking conversations about systemic racism in banking practices. Social media campaigns gained traction, urging institutions to adopt fairer policies. Interviewers asked Marcus how he felt about becoming a national figure. "I didn't do this alone," he replied, his tone humble yet resolute. "This movement belongs to everyone who's ever been told they weren't good enough because of the color of their skin." Grassroots organizations reached out, eager to collaborate. Schools invited him to speak. Entrepreneurs shared stories of overcoming similar barriers. What started as a personal battle had ignited a nationwide push for equity, and Marcus knew this momentum couldn't fade. Still, questions lingered. How far could this movement go? Would it lead to lasting change or fizzle out under pressure? For now, all he could do was keep pushing forward. As Marcus stepped up to the podium for his closing remarks, the crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. "They tried to silence me," he began, his voice ringing with conviction. "They tried to make me believe I didn't belong, but together we proved that no one can take away our power unless we let them." His words resonated deeply, drawing nods and murmurs of agreement from the audience. Supporters raised fists in solidarity, their determination palpable. Marcus scanned the room, taking in the faces of those who had stood by him: friends, family, strangers, turned allies. Each person represented a thread in the larger tapestry of resistance against systemic oppression. "We've taken the first step," he continued, "but the journey doesn't end here. Real change takes courage, persistence, and unity. So let's keep rising, together." With that, the ceremony concluded, but the energy in the air suggested something greater was brewing. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Marcus and his community were ready to face them head-on. This story isn't just fiction, it's inspired by real-life injustices faced by millions. The words linger, heavy with meaning, forcing viewers to pause and reflect. Marcus's journey wasn't an isolated tale. It mirrored struggles countless individuals endure daily. The abrupt shift from narrative to reality creates a bridge between his fight and the audience's potential role in dismantling systemic racism. But this moment isn't the end. It's the beginning. Now comes the question that lingers in every viewer's mind. What would you do if you were in Marcus's shoes? Would you stay silent when faced with discrimination? Or would you rise, like Marcus, to challenge the systems designed to hold you back? It's easy to watch someone else's battle unfold. But what about your own? Every choice matters. Every voice counts. This isn't just about one man's fight for justice. It's about all of us deciding whether we'll stand on the sidelines or step into the arena. Think about it. What will you choose? Marcus's story has shown us that change is possible, but it takes collective effort. Now, it's your turn to act. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What resonated with you? How can we rewrite the rules together? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join the movement for racial equity. Together, we can amplify voices, spark conversations, and drive meaningful progress. Because no one should face injustice alone, and no system is too entrenched to overcome. Let's keep the momentum going.